Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's State and Federal Programs Directors meeting. I am Adrienne Balcazar, and today I am joined by my colleagues, Rachel Garcia, Debbie Cano, Helen Choi, Anita Lomali, and Jeannie Keith. We hope everyone was able to take some time off for spring break, or at least was able to catch up on any work last month. As we see moving forward, we are going to be covering a lot of topics today. We have an update on the consolidated application, the federal program monitoring update. Rachel will share on the LCAP federal addendum. And then we'll also hear from Debbie with some reminders about the local indicators. Helen will share what we know thus far about Prop 28, the Arts and Music in Schools Funding Grant. Anita will also remind us about the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant. And Jeannie will wrap it up and share some important LCAP updates as you prepare for your public hearings and board adoptions of your LCAP. As usual, please place your questions in the chat box and we will answer any simple questions if we can, but we will follow up with written responses in a Q&A that will be emailed to you. Also, we are recording today's training and we will post this on our website. You can also find past Q&As as well as the slides and handouts from our previous meetings at this link. Well, let's get started. So this morning, we're just going to share what we know and what we don't know about the consolidated application. So here we are, almost in May, and we are still waiting for the current year's 22-23 winter release to happen. In case you thought you had missed it, well, you didn't. This year's school year's winter release is expected to happen around May 15th. Once it is released, though, and posted, you will want to review the CARS data release schedule and make sure that you know what reports to submit and when the submission deadline is. You can also watch for notifications from CDE through the CONAP listserv for the date of release and submission deadline. So again, if you're not on that listserv, we really recommend that you do, because generally when they do a release, then you know it's going to be released soon. For next year's 23-24 consolidated application, the spring release is yet to be determined. Although there is rumor that it might be released in the fall. So you have some time, but at the same time, if you're not new to the CONAP, you definitely want to continue getting ready for it so it doesn't surprise you when it is released. Now moving on to federal program monitoring update. Today, we're focusing on the 23-24 FPM reviews. And as we are wrapping up this school year's FPM review cycles, CDE is also preparing for next year's 23-24 FPM reviews. Next year's FPM reviews are for Cycle B, which are on-site reviews, and Cycle D, which are online reviews. Last week, these 18 districts and charter schools were notified of their selection for an FPM review in the 23-24 school year. In case you didn't know, you can take a look and see if your district or your charter school was selected. You also might notice that there are less, if you have been here a while, due to the staffing situation at CDE, they are just don't have the human capacity to do more. So it is reduced from previous years. So for those of you that did not get selected, you might consider that a lucky break. So, but there are 9 for on-site and 9 for online. So you can take a look here. If we look at the current timeline for the 23-24 reviews, we're going to take a look today at April, May, June, and July, August. So if we look at this timeline in April, CDE typically selects the districts and charters who will have an FPM review for the next year. And on May 20th, the district superintendents and charter schools were sent an email. And in this email, the CDE asked the LEA to complete a web-based scheduling and information request. And on this link, you can access the web page in case you did not have, if you're one of those districts that were selected and you haven't seen the email yet, you can go ahead and you can follow this link if indeed you are the FPM coordinator for the district or the charter school. And at this time, you're going to designate the FPM review coordinator for the review. You'll also include other information such as your calendar for next year so that CDE can coordinate the dates of the reviews for next year. Here's a screenshot of the first page of the data collection survey. And so we know that the sooner all 18 districts and charters submit the survey, the sooner those that have been selected will know which when the review will take place and what programs will be reviewed. So it's really important. Generally, they give you like a 2-week window, so it's probably the deadline's coming up fast. So next month is going to be May, very, very quickly. And here we know that the schedule of dates, the schools, and the programs to be reviewed will be emailed to the LEA's FPM review coordinator. Then in June, the 23-24 FPM instruments will be posted on the CDE's compliance monitoring webpage. You can also at this time begin informing and training your staff responsible for the implementation of the programs, and also knowing what the collection of the evidence will be that you're going to need to submit to CDE once those instruments are posted. To find the FPM review information and resources, you can go to the compliance monitoring webpage, and here you can find the general information, training resources. You'll see program instruments. You'll also get information and links and trainings to the California monitoring tool, which is where you will upload your evidence to CDE. And then also there's some correspondence and contact information on this as well. Currently, this year's 22-23 FPM review information is there, but soon they will be adding the 23-24 FPM, and it'll be posted here on this website. As you can see in the screenshot, if lower on this page, you'll start to see the newly added information. So whether you have been selected for an FPM review or not, include the FPM here in the process with the implementation and monitoring of your federal programs. It's extremely important for everyone here to know how to access the FPM box. This is where it's housed. And in August, the CDE will be doing a virtual training, and they have said it's going to be in the first week of August. This is where you're going to want to invite your district and site level staff to this virtual training and continue training the districts and the school staff responsible for the collection. So during the month of August, you're going to want to continue this. So some details about the actual training that's coming up. They say it's August 1st to the 4th on Zoom. And here you're going to find information on the program sessions, the daily schedule, and session links. And this information will all be sent to the LEA FPM review coordinator that you designated in that survey. And they will send this out in early July. And there also will be some pre-recorded videos to introduce some of the programs. Most of the sessions will be live, although there is some pre-work that may be done for certain programs. Also, the FPM training resources are in the CMT box, and something to consider before you join this is to make sure that all your Zoom software is updated. I know I've been caught where I go on and I didn't know there was an update, and so it takes me a little bit longer to get to the session. So again, these are just little details that CDE has recommended that in a preparation for the FPM trainings. And as stated, the FPM uses the box, and this is how you can gather all the resources. You can view the data right now currently for the 22-23 FPM reviews. There are program-specific resources in each of these folders, and they give you examples and samples of items that were for the on-site, online, and telemonitoring schedules, as well as samples for each of the program requirements and evidence. So it's a great resource. And again, even if you're not selected, this is definitely where you go to. I know sometimes we get questions saying, how can we access this? So we try and post the link, and the blue title is the link. But again, we just want to make sure that everyone has access to this, because as the programs are updated every year, the most latest pertinent information regarding each program is placed in these folders. So if you're not checking these periodically for any updates, definitely make sure you add that to your calendar periodically. Next slide, please. And now Rachel will continue by sharing about the LCAP Federal Addendum.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good morning, everyone. So in this section, we just have a few reminders regarding the LCAP Federal Addendum. So LEAs that apply for federal ESSA funds are required to complete the LCAP Federal Addendum. And the Federal Addendum, it's meant to supplement the LCAP. So the LCAP Federal Addendum, and the CONAP together meet the ESSA LEA plan requirements. Now, the Federal Addendum is only required to be submitted to the CDE for approval once during the current authorization of ESEA. So that means if your Federal Addendum was previously approved by the CDE, you do not need to resubmit it each year. However, LEAs that applied for ESSA funding for the first time this year, those LEAs were required to complete and submit a board-approved LCAP Federal Addendum by March 31st. And also, if your LEA is planning to apply for ESSA funding for the first time in the 2023-24 year, then you will be required to complete and submit a board-approved LCAP Federal Addendum in order to receive those ESSA funds. And so that also applies to LEAs applying for a specific program for the first time. So for example, if your LEA has an approved addendum for, let's say, Title I and Title II, but you're applying for Title IV for the first time in 2023-24, then you'll need to complete that section of the addendum, so the Title IV section of the addendum, and submit it to CDE for approval. Now, we often get questions from LEAs about whether or not the federal addendum needs to be updated. And so the requirement is that LEAs must periodically review and revise their federal addendum as necessary. So basically, your LCAP federal addendum, it should match your current programs and address what you are currently doing in your LEA with federal funds. And so if your addendum does not match your current programs, then that means it needs to be updated. Now, there's no specific timeline during the year as to when the federal addendum must be reviewed and revised. However, it's encouraged that LEAs review their federal addendum annually with their LCAP. But again, there's no specific timeline. So revisions to the federal addendum are to be made at the local level. And again, they don't need to be submitted to the CDE unless required by an individual title program office. And revisions to the addendum should be approved by your local governing board. And then one last reminder, just to remember that LEAs are required to prominently post the LCAP or the approved LCAP federal addendum on the LEA's home webpage. And that includes any revisions to the addendum. So this slide here highlights some considerations when reviewing and revising the LCAP federal addendum. If you can go, okay, thank you. So for the Title I Educator Equity section, the data and analysis must be done annually. And so this provision requires LEAs to describe how they will identify and address any disparities that result in low income and minority students being taught at higher rates than other students by ineffective, inexperienced, or out-of-field teachers. And so LEAs need to conduct a local equity gap analysis in order to be able to appropriately describe the local process for identifying and addressing any disparities. And the CDE has several resources and tools available to support LEAs with this process. And so we've included the link to these resources on the slide. For the Title I Parent and Family Engagement section, LEAs need to address how parents were involved in the development of CSI and ATSI plans. So this section may need to be updated if you have newly identified schools for CSI or ATSI. For Title II, LEAs must annually review and, if necessary, make any needed revisions to this section. And then additionally, the prioritizing funding section may need to be revised to address how the LEA will prioritize Title II funding to schools identified for comprehensive support and improvement or targeted support and improvement. And so if you have newly identified schools, that section will need to be revised. The Title III section of the addendum needs to be reviewed and revised annually. And if the use of Title III funding changes, then the revisions need to reflect those changes. For the Title IV section, this needs to be revised every 3 years based on the needs assessment. However, it's important to keep in mind if the use of Title IV funding changes prior to the 3 years, then this section needs to be revised to reflect those changes. And then additionally, if your LEA is participating in federal transferability and decides to transfer funds from Title II or from Title IV, then the addendum again should be revised to reflect those transfer of funds. And then one last thing, just keep in mind that this slide is not all inclusive and there may be other updates needed. And it's the responsibility of the LEA to adhere to the revision and update requirements for each specific title program as applicable. And the CDE recommends that LEAs contact the individual title program offices at the CDE for additional guidance on this. The LCAP federal addendum is monitored through the FPM process, and it's monitored for several programs. And that includes supporting effective instruction, English learners, and student support and academic enrichment. And so this slide highlights the specific items within those 3 FPM program instruments where the LCAP federal addendum will be requested as evidence. And so I'm not going to go through each item, but I would like to highlight that for each program indicated, the review and revision of the LCAP federal addendum is monitored through the FPM process. So it will be important for your LEA to keep records of the review and revision process as evidence. So item 3 in the supporting effective instruction program instrument, this item specifically monitors the requirement to review and revise the federal addendum. So for this item, LEAs will be asked to submit both their original CDE approved LCAP federal addendum as well as their current revised addendum. Other evidence for this item might include materials from local governing board meetings or other LEA documents that provide evidence of implementation as well as monitoring of the LEA's programs. Another area in which the LCAP federal addendum may be reviewed is for EL4. And so LEAs that receive Title III funds, those LEAs are required to annually update, implement, and monitor a Title III plan for the use of Title III funds. So for this item, LEAs may submit their LCAP federal addendum as evidence if the Title III section has been updated for the current year. If the Title III section of the addendum has not been updated to reflect the current year, then it may not meet the Title III plan requirement. And so for this section, the federal addendum would need to show how the LEA plans to spend Title III funds for the current year. The program instrument for student support and academic enrichment monitors the Title IV section of the addendum. And item 9 specifically looks at the CDE approved addendum and any revisions, particularly if the LEA is participating in the federal transferability. So just again, your addendum needs to match your current programs, and FPM reviewers will be looking at whether or not your addendum matches what you're currently doing in your district. And so here on this slide, we've included the links to a few CDE web pages that provide additional information and resources to support you with the LCAP federal addendum. And that concludes this section. So I will now turn it over to Debbie for a reminder on local indicators.
Thank you, Rachel. As Rachel said, we know that we did present this topic during our day one LCAP workshop, but we wanted just to provide you with some current information and a brief reminder. Next slide, please. So again, what are the local indicators? For the LCFF priorities where data is not collected at the state level, LEAs will measure and report its progress through the dashboard based on the locally collected data. And the local indicators provide valuable information for your educational partners to engage meaningfully with a holistic understanding of local successes and challenges as they work through the LCAP planning process. Local indicators do apply to all county offices of education, school districts, and charter schools. Next slide, please. So here on the slide, you can see these are our local indicators that LEAs must measure progress and report annually on based on locally collected data. So this includes priority 1, 2, and 3, priority 6 and 7, and then for county offices only, priority 9 and 10. Next slide, please. So the State Board of Education approved standards for the local indicators that support LEAs in measuring and reporting their progress within the appropriate priority area. So for each of the local indicators, the LEAs must do these 3 things. You must annually measure your progress in meeting the requirement of that specific LCFF priority. You're going to report the results as a part of a non-consent item during a regularly scheduled public meeting of the local governing board at the same meeting where the LCAP is adopted. And then you're going to report the results to the public through the dashboard using the State Board adopted self-reflection tool. So those 3 things would get you to, next slide, a MET. That's how you meet the MET criteria. If the LEA satisfies these performance standards noted on the previous slide, then they will receive a performance rating of MET. If you don't do those 3 things, then the not MET will be applicable. If you don't meet those for 2 years, not MET for 2 or more years will be applied. Next slide, please. The self-reflection, the CDE has created a self-reflection tool for each of the local indicators. The self-reflection tools are available on the CDE's website in the local performance indicator quick guide. And the quick guide was updated recently, and the link to the current guide is here included on the slide. Next slide, please. There are 2 reporting requirements, as previously mentioned, related to the local indicators. First, you must report to the local governing board as a part of a non-consent item, which is going to be coming up when you adopt your LCAP. That's the same time that you would present your local indicators. And then the second reporting requirement is to the dashboard using the State Board adopted self-reflection tools for each local indicator. Next slide. So our timeline for this, and as you know, you're going to work backward from that the board adoption, and you want to work with your LCAP timeline with your LCAP planning. So your local indicators should be shared with your educational partners in order to provide information and feedback as well. So you see on the slide this timeline, on or before July 1st, you're going to present your local indicators, and then mid-August, September would be when you would upload to the dashboard. Next slide. This is a very important reminder for you, and this is something that we wanted to make sure we called to your attention. So priority one, local indicator. It's been traditionally a local indicator. There are three elements of priority one: appropriately assigned teachers, access to curriculum-aligned instructional materials, and then access to safe, clean, and functional school facilities. Well, number 2 and 3 there have not been changed, but number 1, appropriately assigned teachers, was changed in June 22. The state published its first year of teaching assignment information through its teaching assignment monitoring outcome data. That's what it's called, and for short, that's TAMO. And we now must present the TAMO information as part of this local indicator, which is now going to be state gathered data. So the CDE has not released the TAMO data currently. So the CDE recommends that if the TAMO data isn't available when you are scheduled to present your local indicators, that you go ahead and share that information. That TAMO is not available yet, but you would report on the other 2 items, the access to curriculum-aligned material and access to safe and clean functional schools. And then once the TAMO data is available, then you would update your governing board at the next available board meeting. So this is really critical, and we wanted to make sure that we clarified this for everybody because this might be a point of confusion, especially since this is the first year for this. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Helen.
Thank you, Debbie. So on November 8th, 2022, California voters approved Proposition 28, the Arts and Music in Schools Funding Guarantee and Accountability Act. The measure requires that the state to establish a new ongoing program supporting arts instruction in schools beginning the 2023-24 school year. In this section, we will provide current FAQs from Prop 28, the AMS funding. Before we get started, there have been some confusion around Prop 28, Arts and Music Education Funding, and Arts, Music, and Instructional Material Block Grant, also known as the AMIM Block Grant. The two are not the same, and the allowable uses for AMIM Block Grant has been covered in our previous presentations. The FAQs in today's presentation will only address Prop 28, Arts and Music Education Funding, the initiative that provides additional funding for arts education in California public schools. Also, just to let you know, CDE has begun receiving multiple questions, and they have begun addressing the statute. And for the purposes of today, we will go over the FAQs that are now available. So, how much funding is available for Prop 28? The amount of funding available for each fiscal year will be 1% of the K-12 portion of the Proposition 98 funding guarantee provided in the prior fiscal year. So it will be calculated from the prior fiscal year, excluding funding appropriated for the Arts and Music Schools program. So we'll take that out each year. The 23-24 governor's budget will estimate the estimates for the initial amount for this first round. Will the amount of funding for each fiscal year change? Yes, before the start of each fiscal year cycle, the amount available for the AMS program will be estimated by the Department of Finance. The final amount will be provided by the Department of Finance the following January. As a result, the funding will be recalculated and LEA allocations may be adjusted. Is there a timeline available for the rollout of funding to LEAs? The first allocation and apportionment of the AMS program funding will occur later in the fiscal year 23-24. Once all necessary information to perform the calculation is available, CDE is unable to provide more specific information at this time. Who is eligible to receive AMS funding? Eligible recipients include certain public school preschools, TK through 12 public schools, including charter schools, and the state special schools as listed on the slide. Funding will be calculated at the school site level and allocated to the LEAs. which is required to allocate funds to eligible school sites in the amounts calculated by CDE. Which preschools will be receiving funding? Funding for preschools is limited to LEA-based California state preschool programs and preschools for pupils with exceptional needs in an LEA. In accordance with statute, all funds will be apportioned to the LEA, which is required to allocate funds to the eligible school sites in the amount, again, calculated by CDE. Are there restrictions on how schools can use the funding? So LEAs with more than 500 pupils must expend at least 80% of the funds to employ certificated or classified employees to provide arts education, instruction, and the remaining funds for training, supplies, curriculum, professional learning, and materials and arts educational partnership programs. So it's an 80-20 split. In addition, no more than 1% of these funds may be expended on administrative costs. What type of arts programs can these funds be used for? Arts education program includes, but not limited to, instruction and training, supplies, materials, and arts educational partnership programs for instructions in dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual arts, including folk art, painting, sculpture, photography, craft arts, creative expressions using graphic arts, design, computer coding, animation, music composition, ensembles, script writing, costume design, film, and video. So there's a variety of programs within arts education for schools to use this money. Who decides which program a school will offer? Each school can determine which program or programs it will offer. School administrators, in collaboration with teachers, families, and students, should together make a choice that best serves students in their local school community. So can schools pool their AMS funds, and can school districts help facilitate inter-school programs? Yes. Schools can share teachers and teacher aides, as well as community arts partners, and school districts can help facilitate that sharing. Among schools, for example, a teacher could teach at one school on Monday, Tuesday, and at the another school on Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays. However, other restrictions outside of AMS could prohibit or restrict this. Will these funds be subject to an annual state compliance audit pursuant to Education Code Section 41020? Yes. AMS funds are subject to an annual audit to include verification that LEA has expended funds in accordance with their certification and the requirements in EC Section 8220, beginning with the 23-24 annual audit. And more information will be provided next year. What are the reporting requirements for this program? Each school is required to submit an annual board-approved reports to be posted on the school district and the departments of education's website, and that details the type of arts education programs funded by the program, the number of full-time equivalent teachers, classified personnel, and teaching aides, and the number of pupils served, and the number of school sites providing arts education programs with such funds. So here we have the resources. The first link is the Prop 28 webpage with the FAQs, as well as other pertinent information. There's also Prop 28 email address that you can send questions to. And finally, I encourage you to sign up for Prop 28 listserv so that you can get updated information as it comes out from CDE. And that's it for this section. And now I'll turn it over to Anita for Learning Recovery Education Block Grant.
Thank you, Helen, and good morning, everyone. In the forthcoming slides, we will be taking a look at the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant with some updates, information to consider, and reminders. Next slide, please. If you recall, late last June in 2022, Assembly Bill 182 amended Ed Code Section 32526 to appropriate over $7.9 billion in support of the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, also referred to as LREBG. Funding was provided to county offices of education, school districts, and charter schools in 2 equal apportionments calculated on a per unit basis based on each LEA's reported average daily attendance and multiplied by the LEA's 2021-22 UDP percentage for kindergarten and grades 1 through 12. The second and final apportionment of the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant has been allocated to LEAs this month. Grant funds may be expended through the end of the 27-28 school year. A link to funding allocations has been provided on this slide. The spreadsheet lists the total amount of Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant funds allocated to each eligible LEA. Let's look back for a moment. The creation of the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant was in response to the alarming and dire situations that resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic. Here are a few critical and sobering data points that do beg our attention. To begin, a little over 3 years ago, Governor Newsom proclaimed a state of emergency due to COVID-19. Less than 1 year later, by January 2021, it was estimated that 20,000 children in our state had lost at least one parent or primary caregiver to COVID-19. 4 months ago, that number was now more than double. Over 42,000 children in our schools have lost at least one parent or caregiver to this virus. Over 66% of the children affected by the parent or caregiver death in California are Hispanic Latinx. During the 2021 school year, the year when many of our students in the state were in some shape or form learning remotely, a survey of middle and high school students self-reported feeling traumatized due to the pandemic. 63% reported experiencing an emotional meltdown, and 19% reported having suicidal thoughts. When comparing CAST data results in ELA and math between the 18-19 school year and the 21-22 school year, we see what we all probably anticipated but hoped would not happen. In ELA, where students in the state of California were only 2.5 points away from standard in 2019, now found themselves 12.2 points below standard. And in math, California students went from 33.5 points below standard to now 51.7 points below standard. There is no doubt that these past few years have been the most trying and difficult for students, teachers, school administrators, district administrators, staff, and parents. Enter a glimmer of hope, a newfound opportunity for purpose post-pandemic, an educational renaissance, if you will. The Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant allows for LEAs to implement learning recovery initiatives that at minimum support academic learning recovery and support staff and pupil social and emotional well-being. With the full allocations in hand at the present moment, LEAs are able to ideate, develop, enhance, support, and implement programs and services that span the length of 6 school years. Providing academic access, as well as social and emotional well-being to students via services and programs that are highly effective will shrink equity gaps and help students, especially those most impacted by the pandemic, recover and thrive. One quote that I believe helps to cement our purpose in our work is this: if kids come to school from strong, healthy families, it makes our job easier. If they do not come to us from strong, healthy, functioning families, it makes our job more important. And so now that we've had some time to reflect on its purpose, let's take a moment to recall the allowable uses of these funds under the law. Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant funds may only be expended for the purposes specified in California Ed Code Section 32526C2. This includes 1, instructional learning time for the 22-23 through the 27-28 school years by increasing the instructional days or minutes provided during the school year, providing summer school or other intersession programs, or any other action that increases instructional time or services to students, or decreases the staff to student ratios based on student needs. Another allowable use includes accelerating progress to close learning gaps through the implementation, expansion, or enhancement of learning supports. This may include tutoring provided by certificated or classified staff, learning recovery programs and materials, early intervention and literacy programs, supporting expanded learning opportunity program services, or providing services consistent with the California Community Schools Partnership Act. Other allowable uses include 3, integrating pupil supports to address barriers to learning and staff supports and training, including health, counseling, or mental health services, before and after school programs, or programs to address trauma and social emotional learning. Also, access to instruction for credit deficient students to complete graduation requirements and increase students' college eligibility. And lastly, any additional academic services for students, such as progress monitoring and benchmark assessments. The California Department of Education has a dedicated resource page with information about programs that may be used to support learning acceleration and recovery. Some of what you'll find are programs that offer education, training, or professional development pertinent to learning recovery, and programs that other LEAs have created or adopted to support learning acceleration and recovery. In addition, you will be able to find previous and upcoming webinars that share valuable information on topics such as the grant itself, acceleration in mathematics, and how to leverage the MTSS framework for learning recovery. Reporting requirements. Per Ed Code Section 32526D, on or before June 30th, 2023, which is coming up soon, the CDE must develop an expenditure report template that LEAs must use to report their expenditures to the CDE. The template must include total expenditures by fiscal year for each allowable use, disaggregated by each allowable use, and the template must use language that is understandable and accessible to parents. Be on the lookout for a reference template by June of this year from the CDE. LEAs must use the CDE developed template to report interim expenditures to the CDE by December 1st of 2024 and December 1st of 2027, and a final expenditure report by December 1st of 2029. Per statute, the expenditure report must also be made publicly available on the LEA's website. And for a final reminder that is very important to note, if an LEA does not submit the final report by December 1st, 2029, they will forfeit all Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant funds. In addition, if a charter school closes before December of 2029, a final expenditure report will be due within 60 days of the closure date. If the report is not submitted to the CDE within this timeframe, all apportionments received by that charter school will be forfeited. And lastly, here are a few frequently asked questions related to these funds. Is a plan required? The answer is no. Statute does not require LEAs to develop a plan for the use of these funds. However, as noted on the previous slide, LEAs are required to report expenditures to the CDE using the CDE template, which is forthcoming, most likely in June. 2, how long do LEAs have to spend these funds? As previously mentioned, LEAs may expend these funds through the 27-28 school year. Also keep in mind that all expenditures must be linked to an allowable use. Do supplement not supplant requirements apply to these funds? The answer is no. Statute does not include a supplement not supplant requirement. That means that LEAs may use these funds to pay expenses previously funded by another source. Will these funds be subject to the annual audit? Education Code Section 32526 does not contain an annual audit requirement, so these funds are not subject to the annual audit. These frequently asked questions are posted on the CDE website at the link provided, along with several other FAQs related to these funds. That concludes this section. I will now turn it over to Jeannie for an update on the LCAP.
Thank you so much, Anita, and good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well today. If you could go to the next slide, please, Helen. Thank you. So we have a few components in our LCAP update today, and this first one addresses a new bulletin that has been released by our business office, and it addresses the LCAP and budget public hearings and the publication requirements for this. And so this bulletin is important. It reminds LEAs of the requirements to hold at least 2 public meetings to address the requirement for the LEA to hold a public hearing for the LCAP and a public hearing for the budget for the 2023-24 school year. The bulletin requests information in order to publish required notice of public hearing on each district's LCAP and budget. And this request goes to the governing board. And this information will be published in the newspaper. And this publication, per statute, must take place at least 10 days prior to the scheduled public hearing. So to adhere to these required timelines for publication in the newspaper, the completed form with information about the public hearing for the LCAP and the budget must be submitted to LACO by May 15th. And the information included in the form will appear in the selected newspaper that is indicated on the form. Additionally, the memo reminds school districts of the May revised date and the requirement to include budget assumptions from the May revise in their LCAP for the upcoming school year. Right, next slide, please. And this next slide, we provide a timeline reminder of the required steps outlined in 52062 that need to be followed prior to the governing board adopting the district LCAP in June. Evidence that these steps have been followed should be identified and addressed in the 3 prompts in the Engaging Educational Partners section in the LCAP. Additionally, the times calendared and noticed in the newspaper publications for public hearing should align with the times identified and addressed in the LCAP. We also remind LEAs that the public hearings and related information must be agendized and posted 72 hours prior to the meetings. Additionally, we remind LEAs that they must notify members of the public of the opportunity to submit written comments regarding specific actions and expenditures in the LCAP. This may be done in multiple formats, including through online posting and online submission of comments, as well as through written comments collected at locations where the LCAP draft actions and expenditures may be reviewed. LEAs need to notify the public of the opportunity to submit these written comments. And this notification could include multiple formats, such as through web posting, newsletters, robocalls, etc. Next slide, please. This slide is providing an opportunity for LCAP office hours for charter schools. And we have, with all of our districts, our unit has been meeting with each district to review the checklist for school districts. And last year, we provided a checklist also for charter schools because they requested a checklist be provided for them to conduct a self-review of their LCAP. And we've updated the charter school self-review checklist this year, and it aligns with each of the LCAP sections, as well as the budget overview for parents. We've sent out information regarding registration, and the link to register for this office hour is also included on the slide. At this office hour, we will go through the LCAP self-review checklist for charter schools, and we will also review LCAP resources, as well as the submission process in eLCAP, in which each of the charter schools will submit their LCAP to be posted on the LACO website. Next slide, please. We've received a lot of questions regarding the use of the LCAP as the SPSA. And this can be confusing, but there are different parent engagement requirements when the charter school decides to use the LCAP as its school plan for student achievement. And fortunately, CDE has recently updated their frequently asked questions to address this requirement for parent engagement. And so you can see on the slide that if a charter school or single school district is using the LCAP as its school plan for student achievement, the charter school or single school district is required to establish a parent advisory committee and an English learner parent advisory committee, if applicable. And so this is important, and also it provides a clarification of what the parent advisory committee is composed of. And the parent advisory committee is different than the school site council. And this response makes it very clear. You can see that the parent advisory committee must be composed of a majority of parents or legal guardians of currently enrolled students. The committee must include parents of students who are low income, English learner and foster youth, and parents of students with disabilities. And also CDE notes, and this is very important, when establishing the Parent Advisory Committee, LEAs are encouraged to include parents that represent the student demographics that the LEA serves. And noted also is that beginning with the 23-24 school year, school districts and county offices that serve middle and high school students will need to include 2 student members on the Parent Advisory Committee or establish a Student Advisory Committee to provide review and comment related to the LCAP. Right, next slide, please. So this slide clarifies the requirement for engagement in the case that a charter school is using a separate school plan for student achievement and a separate LCAP. And so here it very clearly states charter schools that are developing an SPSA that is separate from their LCAP are required to annually develop their SPSA in accordance with law and with the involvement of the applicable advisory committees and school site councils. And likewise, if the charter school is developing an LCAP that does not include their SPSA, they are required to consult with teachers, principals, administrators, other school personnel, parents, and pupils in developing the LCAP. So you can see from the 2 slides, the distinction for parent engagement is clearly different when there are two plans versus when there is a combined plan. Before we close today, we want to share that we've heard that many of you are, or not many of you, that maybe some of you are retiring. And we would really like to honor you and celebrate you. So please let us know that you're retiring. You could put it in the chat. You could send us an email. You could give us a call. But we really appreciate all of you and all the hard work that you've done for many years. And so if you're retiring, please let us know so we can celebrate you. And on our slide, you see that our next meeting is May 25th. And that will be our final meeting to conclude the 2023 school year. So we'll leave the chat open for a moment or two in case you have an additional question. And we will be following up with our Q&A as soon as we've had time to research and provide accurate responses to your questions. And on behalf of the team, I thank you for joining us today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the week. Thank you for joining us.